I'm delighted to introduce Geoff Rogers, who will be our moderator for the day. Jeff.
Good morning. Only my mother still calls me Jeffrey, but the funny thing about Philip's speech and Joy's speech before that, it was like, okay, and we're going to come after that and be exciting and interesting. So, Martha, we're going to need an increase in our compensation for this. So, let me introduce you to the panel. It's Nancy Needell from Weill Cornell, Philip, whose rhetorical splendor you just enjoyed, Rima Rivera from Protective Services, and Dionne Woodward from JASA. You're a lawyer, APS, you we'll get to, and Nancy's a psychiatrist from Weill Cornell. So this is just going to be a discussion between the panel as well as, and we will invite your input at the very end, and we're going to proceed through a case, and here we go. So this is the story of Yelena. She was born in Siberia in 1938. On a trip to Moscow when she was 20, she met Alex, whom she married in 1960. In 1991, they emigrated to the United States. Alex had been an engineer in the USSR, but once he got here, he did various jobs until he was licensed as an electrical engineer. Yelena worked variously at cleaning houses, running a small childcare agency, keeping the books for a small company, and waitressing. Eventually, they were able to buy a 4-family house in Brooklyn, renting 3 of the apartments. Unfortunately, Alex died in 2000. Yelena is not a fluent English speaker. She has impaired vision. Most of her close friends remained in Siberia. Her American friends had either moved away or died. Peter, a paralegal at a law firm, a very friendly and supportive friend of Yelena, lately they have grown close. One of Yelena's tenants complained to HPD about the lack of heat. HPD had discovered that the heating accounts for the tenants' apartments had not been paid for 6 months. Yelena, when confronted with this, was very apologetic, and she says in broken English, I'm sorry, Peter's helping with the bills, and everything will be okay. Later, there's a small fire in Yelena's apartment. The fire department found that Yelena had gone out and left a stewing pot on the stove. And again, she was apologetic. She said that she had a lot on her mind. She had cousins in Siberia who were sick, and she had been sending money to help them out with their medical bills. HPD sends an inspector out to make sure that all the tenants have heat. One of the tenants complains that there's no heat at night. The inspector went to discuss this with Yelena, and Peter came to the door and told the inspector Yelena was sleeping. The inspector related the tenant complaint, and Peter said he had ordered a new boiler, which is scheduled to be installed. The inspector returns a while later to check on the installation of the boiler and the complaints and finds that there's still no heat at night. And again, the inspector attempts to contact Yelena, and again, it's Peter who answers the door, and they have a discussion about why there's a problem with the heat. The tone of discussion leads to the inspector warning Peter that if the problem lingers and it isn't resolved, Yelena could be fined and a lien could be placed on her property. The inspector asks to speak with Yelena, but Peter says that Yelena was not feeling well. So, now, to the panel. Let's start with Rima. What's your reaction so far?
There's some glaring issues, some red flags. The fact that Peter keeps coming to the door, there seems to be some issues with isolation. Sure.
Oh, the mic's not working?
Is it working? Can you hear me? Okay.
Lean in.
I'm leaning in. The fact that there's no boiler, she hasn't paid the utility arrears. There's arrears, I'm assuming, accumulating 6 months. So that's a big red flag. Who's Peter? And how did Peter come into the picture? So he's a paralegal. I can't understand how and when did they meet? What's the nature of the relationship? The fact he's a paralegal is something that you should keep in mind as well. He has some knowledge of the law. So if this case came to APS at this point, our main goal, of course, is to keep the client safe.
Hey, hang on. Don't give it all away
Am I
yet.
jumping?
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Dionne, just from a legal perspective, is there any action that we can take keeping with today's theme?
Right now, there really isn't any action until we do further investigation.
So what sort of information would you need?
I would need to know where the money's going. Just as we talked about earlier, you've got to follow that money. You've got to find that money trail. How come the bills are not being paid? Why is there no heater? Why, and who is she sending this money to? Who's this cousin in Siberia? So right now, I would be concerned with following that money. I too would be concerned about Peter, and I'd be concerned as to where exactly is Elena? Why isn't she coming to the door?
So let me interrupt you, which I will.
Jeff, I expect nothing else.
What's your concern about Peter?
Well, my concern is, why is he there? Is he staying with her? And like I said, Peter has a lot to do with where Elena is. Why isn't Elena coming?
But she's isolated. She has this really great guy who's helping her. What's the problem?
Well, you need to see whether he's truly helping her. We need to speak to Elena. She's isolated, as you said. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find out if there is a problem.
So I'm Elena. I'm Elena.
Oh, Jeff, you're not Elena, but okay.
That takes some imagination.
What's the question you want to ask me? What do you want to know?
I want to know who Peter is, what his relationship is to you.
He's a very good friend of mine.
Have you given him control of your finances?
He manages my money for me. I can't see so well anymore.
And where is it? Do you have an accounting of where he's
talk to Peter. Talk to Peter. Talk to Peter.
Well, I would want to say that, remember, I'm an attorney, Jeff. I'm not a social worker.
I know.
So we're
going to get to the social worker.
So right now, I want to know
You got to represent here.
I want to know whether, because remember, Elena, as long as she's competent, she can make her own decisions. So she can advise Peter to do things for her. So we're at that stage now where we want to see, why is she allowing Peter to do that?
So she's not a social worker, I heard.
Thank you.
And Rima, so pitch in here.
Well, okay. Well, what you want to identify is the fact that Yelena, although she came to this country at the age of 51, she had 4 jobs, so she's quite resourceful. So you want to find out how she coped before Peter entered into the picture. You know? So her husband died in 2000, that's 16 years ago. How did she get by? When did the arrears start accumulating? It was 6 months ago. So how was she doing before then? Who was managing the money? Was she doing it? So when you approach her, you want to acknowledge the fact that she has a great story.
So I'm Yelena.
You're Yelena.
Again. Okay. So what kind of, couple of questions, what are the most pressing questions you want to ask me?
Well, Yelena, before Peter, how did you manage? I think it's the mic.
I think all these, it's Peter. So I stole that from Nancy. So you want to ask again?
I want to know, Yelena, how did you cope before? I understand Peter is
I work very hard. I come to this country. We save our money. We buy the house.
And yes, and I acknowledge that's a great achievement. And in doing so, how did your husband, I'm sorry, passed away 16 years ago. That must have been very hard.
Yes.
Since then, before Peter, how did you do it? How did you manage the building?
So Nancy, what's Rima's goal here?
I think Rima's goal is to find out what's different. She apparently must have done well functioning in the 16 years or 15 years between when her husband died and when Peter came along and the bills stopped being paid and the boiler stopped being replaced. What's changed? Because that's something from a psychiatrist's point of view, what's different now? Why now? Why now?
So from your psychiatrist's point of view, are there any mental health issues that you're thinking about at this point?
I'm always thinking about mental health issues. In you or in
Stick to the script.
Okay, so, but having said that, and all joking aside, I'm looking for mental health issues, but before I look for mental health issues, I'm looking for medical issues too, because we can't separate the two. We know that she has impaired vision. We know she's not a fluent English speaker, but those things may have worsened or may have worsened for a lot of us. They may have worsened her impaired vision, maybe because Peter hasn't gotten her glasses fixed.
Okay.
Makes it a heck of a lot easier for him to put something in front of her to sign.
Okay.
So, sorry, I'm getting...
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Really. So we're going to move on. The inspector made visits finding no one home, but by chance ran into one of the tenants who told him that Yelena was hospitalized. The tenant was also said that Yelena's cousin recently had visited. She didn't remember the cousin's name, but thought that he was charming and kept asking about Peter. As the inspector was leaving, he encountered a man who politely asks, "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" But then he softens and introduces himself as Yelena's cousin, George. The inspector informed him about the heating problems. George said that he was having some more regular contact with Yelena due to his concerns about Peter's relationship with Yelena. But George assured the inspector that, and he says, "We're taking care of it. We still have complaints about the heat, and if this problem continues," the inspector says, and it continues to drag on, again, he reiterates the necessity of putting a lien on the property to get the heat fixed. So, okay, so at this point, Philip, what's your perspective here?
As George?
As George, yes.
Well, I came over because I was really concerned about my aunt.
Right.
And I felt that she had a bit of diminished capacity, but I also felt there was something else going on. I just didn't know. So I came over, and I knew some of the tenants from before, and I started talking with them.
Now step out of character for a second. You, as what you've experienced with your grandmother, what advice would you give George?
Well, I would definitely go with follow the money. My greatest concern is my aunt, so I would get her to her doctor and have a physical and psychological exam. That would be the first thing. I also, have we gotten to guardianship?
No, not yet. Don't give it away.
Needed
more rehearsals.
Spoiler alert. And so, but I'm really concerned about her first, and then secondly, about what's happening with her in terms of undue influence and isolation.
But what about her autonomy, Dionne?
Yes.
Yes, there we go. So what about the fact that we're already thinking about intruding on her autonomy?
Exactly. And once again, more of a social work answer. She has the right to make poor decisions, right? So we're looking to see what is the factor, what is it that's influencing these decisions, and is there some undue influence? Is there, and we're not going to jump to it, but is there some other kind of impairment? Is it like we're saying here, is it that she's signing things and not being able to read them? Is it that she does truly not understand what's going on? And then I wonder a little bit about her. If some of the tenants are not getting heat, is she getting heat? What's going on with her?
So, Rima, now as an APS person, you guys trade in risk. Is there a risk here? Is there anything that we should be concerned about?
Well, the first risk, of course, is as you mentioned, if they're not getting heat, she may not be getting heat.
Right.
So
let's say she's getting heat.
okay, somehow she's getting heat and nobody else is. But
Yes.
let's go with
It's
that.
magical. Yes.
Well, it's funny because I'll be wondering who George is. Now, all of
Yeah.
a sudden, there's a George in the picture. And
So what are you going to do to establish the identity of George, for example? What are you going to do to sort of concretize this?
the only thing I could do is interview George and
Okay.
find out why he's there.
So
and what
I'm
his
George.
intent.
It's a multiple personality disorder that's really,
That's why I'm here.
really very helpful here.
George, no, right,
So I'm George. What are kind of the questions you want to ask me?
Well, George, you haven't been. When was the last time you contacted Yelena?
Oh gosh, about a couple of months ago.
Well, what brings you to New York?
Well, I wanted to just check on Yelena.
You seem to be concerned about what's going on with Peter.
I am. Well, my concerns are that, he might be exploiting my cousin.
So what do you think you're going to do about that? How long are you going to be staying?
I'm not sure, and I don't want to interfere with her life. Bit of a stumper, I know. Okay.
Well, at that point, we just have to take him at face value,
Right.
correct?
Exactly. So then, how are you gonna do this? What are you gonna do to sort of make a decision of whether or not you should further intervene, or you want to what do you want to do? Let it stew for a little bit?
Well, my first concern is Yelena.
Right. So
Okay.
what are your concerns about Yelena?
Again, follow the money.
Okay.
We've established that she has close to $800,000.
Okay, but they don't know that.
They
She has
don't know. Oh,
close
my
to
God.
$800,000.
I keep jumping.
Okay. Wow. More rehearsals. So okay. So
We didn't really get to rehearse this.
so okay. She has $800,000, and let's say that the mortgage is completely paid off.
Okay.
So what's your concern about money? She's not got. All she has to do is basically worried about taxes, right? So what's your concern?
Right, exactly, and that's why I guess I'm a little worried about George, because when people have money,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, people who weren't involved with the person all of a sudden descend out of nowhere, you start wondering what their intentions are.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to follow the money. Haven't gotten to that part yet.
Yeah, that's okay. Keep going.
So I just want to make sure, is anyone
Uh-huh.
going to pay the utility arrears? Is
So
the boiler going to be put back
but,
on?
Is that a risk? Let's say that she has heat. The other folks we don't really care about. They're ancillary to this process, right? Our main concern is Yelena. So what's the beef here?
Well, the beef is also that she was hospitalized, correct?
Right.
Right. She was deemed confused, but then they realized it was probably because she was dehydrated. Why is she dehydrated?
Right.
Is she malnourished? Is she getting food, adequate fluids? The fact that, does George also understand that Peter has been somewhat isolating Yelena? Yelena is a perfect person, vulnerable to isolation. She
Right.
speaks little English.
Right.
She's widowed. She has no family or supports in the community. She has impaired vision. She's totally dependent on Peter.
So okay, I want to talk to Philip for a little bit. So, in the situation that you faced with your grandmother, social isolation was a key factor in how he was going to run that game. How did you sort of pierce that shell of social isolation?
I think just because there was complete betrayal by my father, there was a level of trust with people who were her circle of support. So
Right.
and I think that is important, and I think that's been compromised by the isolation.
So let's change that scenario a little bit.
Okay.
Let's say she doesn't have that many supports in this scenario.
Right.
What would be your thoughts about how you would go about sort of piercing that shell?
In terms of the isolation?
Yep.
Well, I'm here, and I would suggest that she find out, for example, with her doctor. And I don't know, I think I'd still go to the doctor first. I don't know if she has a lawyer or anybody else in there, but she's got a lot of assets.
Okay.
And I'd see who the players are and the professional players, recognizing she doesn't have a lot of close friends.
So Nancy, what would you want to say to her doctor?
Well, the first thing I'd want to know is what was she in the hospital for? I would also want to know what chronic condition she has, what acute situations she has, I have a lot of things I'd want to know from the doctor. So
Keep going.
okay.
We got our time.
What has changed? How did she used to be? How does she seem now? I would want to know, and this is where I get very pragmatic, where does she get, what pharmacy do you prescribe her medications to? And then I would follow up with the pharmacy to make sure they've been picked up and whether they've been renewed. If it's June and the last time her monthly blood pressure meds were picked up is January, I'm a little worried because, and this goes back to kind of the boiler and all of that. If one thing isn't being done, there's a lot of things that aren't being done. Usually only one aspect doesn't slip.
So what would if I told you she was discharged from the hospital with 8 times 7 home care, and as soon as she got, and 7 times 8, sorry, as soon as she got home, she fired the home attendant.
Okay, that's very concerning to me.
Okay.
The first thing I'd want to know is why did you set up home care? Because it's not necessarily an easy or automatic thing to do.
Right.
So in order to get that much home care, there's a need.
Right.
So I'd want to know what the need is, and then I'd want to know what the risks are for not having home care. Is she going to fall? Are you worried about her falling? I would want to, if I had been able to get into the home, I would want to look around and see if there are falls risks. I would want to see if I could have finessed it. I would have wanted to look in the refrigerator and make sure that there's fresh food in the house. If there's a pet in the house, I would want to make sure that the pet had water.
Right.
These are all things that go together, and it's part of the home care. And then I'd want to know why the home attendant was fired, and I'd want to know who fired it. Her or him, I'm sorry. That was terrible.
Okay.
And I'd want to get a new psychiatrist because I'm not a very good one. But there's a lot. I mean, you have yet to tell me anything that's comforting or reassuring.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So Dionne.
Yes.
Is there any are we close to a threshold where a legal intervention would be considered?
Well, you're close, but you're still not quite there.
Okay. What will we need?
We need to see what exactly is going on, because what's the legal intervention for?
Yeah.
Is it that she is being isolated? Then you really have to see whether or not she truly is. Is she choosing to be by herself? You need to interview Peter a little bit more. And you know what? I need to talk to you, George. I need to see what's going on with you and why you're taking such a hands-off approach. I also, once again, I'm a big one with following that money. I want to see if George is the cousin. Can George get me her bank accounts? Can George get me any statements without me being they want me to play 2 roles. I'm not an ADA.
Oh,
so I can't get any-
Oh, well, out of character. Wow. Wow.
So I don't have any subpoena powers, but if I can get it from the family, which is why it's so important to collaborate, to act together.
So suppose I told you
Yes. what
that
are you gonna tell me,
she had 1.7 million and now she's down to 800,000.
Then I'd be happy, because now I can follow somebody. Now you've got me involved.
Don't you love a capitalist
see-
society? I'm really happy that you lost your money.
Yeah. Now I can see, because, when you're thinking about elder abuse, it's not just, and I know we had skipped around, and now I'm trying to get back to your script.
Yes.
But in part of it,
Thank
we
you,
talked
Dionne.
about, yes, I'm keeping everyone in control. But, so when we talked about it, and the fact that she went to the hospital, we could be talking about negligence now, right? So that's something that maybe I can sink my teeth into. I couldn't before because we didn't mention it.
Right.
But maybe that's something I can sink my teeth into, to see what's going on with the negligence, and then also to see what's going on with the money.
Okay. Is there anything for you if I change in that changed scenario, Rima, where there is evidence that there is money has been drained from her accounts?
Right.
Is there sufficient enough for you to be able to intervene at this point, or what are you thinking?
Well, at that point, I'll be going to her and asking her is what it is that she needs in order to put a case together.
Okay.
We know that money has been dwindling from the account.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to freeze someone's account. We would have to go to our Office of Legal Affairs to do that, and there has to be proof that this is being done. And going back to the isolation, I just also wanted to add that you also have to think about the cultural implications about this. She's from
Russia.
Siberia, Russia. She may have fear of the government,
Right.
a government worker knocking on her door.
Right.
It could be that she wants Peter, or she wants George
Right.
to answer the door. She doesn't want any
So,
kind of-
and suppose I told you that both Peter and George are, well, obviously George is, but suppose Peter is Russian as well. Does
Right.
that change?
Well, the patriarchal society, perhaps Peter's saying,
Right.
I'll handle it. Don't
Right.
worry about it.
Right,
You stay in the bedroom.
right. Okay.
So it's just something that you have to consider. I'm not saying that that's what's going on, but it's just something that you should keep in mind.
So you have the inference that there's some financial problem here, yes? What would you need from Nancy if you were going to pursue an intervention, Dionne?
Well, I would need from Nancy to provide me, if I can get the bank accounts, the bank statements.
But she's a psychiatrist.
No, oh, I'm sorry, from Nancy, I'm sorry.
You'll get that
Well,
from
why
me.
did you switch it? I was going with it. I
You
had
need to be
So get that
flexible
from me.
here,
I
or
had
this
such a
will never
great
work.
plan. I had such a great plan. Okay, Nancy, so come on, Nancy. So Nancy, what I need from you is I need to know what her cognitive ability is. I would need to, for you, and if you've had the opportunity to meet with her, to let me know, is she somewhat impaired? Does she have the ability to make her own decisions, or is Peter making those decisions for her, or
Okay.
George?
So we're going to move on. The case was referred to APS. The APS caseworker made several visits before interviewing Yelena. In the interview with Peter translating, Yelena was cordial and seemingly alert, but had trouble remembering her exact age. She referred to the president as the shrub guy, saying several times during the interview, Peter has been managing my money, that's why he's the manager. He's my friend. Before Peter, I was lonely. I never go out. Peter took me on a cruise last year. My son is gone west somewhere. Now what, panel? Is there
Yikes.
more? Is there something we can do more with this? Has this advanced your sense of the case?
Well, it's funny. These cases tend to, it's like peeling an artichoke, more information keeps coming up to the surface. First of all, I think I heard a whole bunch of APS workers out there grumbling when Peter was actually doing the interpreting for Yelena.
There was a rumbling. Pay no mind to them.
Pay no mind. So what stands out is a cruise,
Right.
okay? Who paid for the cruise? And they're sharing a room.
Yes. So they shared a room. What's the problem with that? It's
Well,
a stateroom.
It could be that they're trying to save money, yeah,
Right.
but I doubt it. I
To
mean,
pay
it's
for the
something
heat.
that,
Yeah.
Right.
it's something to explore.
Okay. So finally, the caseworker made another visit, accompanied this time by the APS translator. Peter and George were present. After a while, the caseworker told them that she needed to spend some time with Yelena. George agrees to leave. Peter refuses, saying, I'm responsible for Yelena's safety. Yelena pleads with the caseworker to allow him to stay. The following information emerges from the interview. Yelena is lonely, she has a poor understanding of her finances, and she relies on Peter for help with her finances and assistance with her ADLs.
You know, ideally, you want to interview her separately, but if that's not the case and she insists that he stay, you can actually use that as an opportunity to see their interaction. Does he let her speak? When she does speak, does she glance at him to seek approval? So that in itself, although it's not ideal, you can gain some information.
So
from that.
Nancy, anything here now that we've sort of come to this point in the case?
I definitely would like an opportunity to assess her capacity and to meet her and get to know her better.
What would the assessment of her capacity be focused around?
I think the first thing that I would do in this case is she has a poor understanding of her finances would be the first thing I would address, because I am looking at her capacity to make financial decisions first and foremost, because she's made an imprudent decision, if it was her decision, to go on a cruise rather than provide heat to her tenants. And so that could have lasting repercussions if she has a lien on her property. So I would want to understand, she's already acknowledging, even in the presence of Peter, that she has a poor understanding of her finances. I would remember that for approximately 15 years after her husband died and before Peter came along, that was not the case. So something has changed. And again, as a doctor or as a psychiatrist, I'm always looking at the what's different. I go into an assessment assuming somebody has capacity, and it's I have to, if I believe that somebody has lacks capacity, I have to prove that. So I have to look at what's different between 2000 and now. Is she more lonely? Does that make her more vulnerable? It's still in the back of my head. I'm still distracted by who's Peter and how did he come into her life? That's extremely important to me. Has he taken on more responsibilities over the years? Has he always had this much responsibility and we didn't know because he was doing a better job before, but now that she's more vulnerable, he's taking more advantage? I don't know. I can usually get the opportunity to see somebody alone, because for better or for worse, when your first name is doctor, people allow you to do things that they don't allow you to do when your first name is something
caseworkers
else.
just say they're doctors.
Absolutely. I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
Any last before we turn it over to the audience? Anything from the panel? Any last words you want to talk about? No. Excellent.
Can
No.
I just throw
Yeah.
in my grandfather, who was not a doctor, he said something that guides me a lot when I do these evaluations, which is, I want to get it right. Blood is thicker than water, but money is thicker than blood. And I always remember that when I go into one of these assessments.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
So.
Well, that's all we have. Any questions from the audience, or you're all stunned into silence? Well, thank you.
No, but there's a question.
Oh, sorry.
I'm going to take questions.
There's a family member. Why has nobody investigated where her son is?
He's out
That's
west.
true. That's something that we definitely
Yeah.
will explore. Try and get information, contact information.
But
She's- go
let
ahead.
me push back at the audience here.
Okay.
That's a risk. But the family member, he's not around. He's out west somewhere. There's a microphone if you want to use it. There's one there too.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Maybe he's not aware that his mother is going through the situation. It would be helpful if we ask
What?
Ask the son what how is he dealing with his mother? Has he spoken to his mother? Do he know what's going on with his mother? That's important.
It could be that Peter's keeping her away from her son.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. A couple of more questions, and then we've got to sort of put this baby to. Power of attorney. Okay, that's a good question. So let's say that George has power of attorney now. No, Peter. Let's make it Peter. Peter has power of attorney. Now, let's say that you have sufficient criteria here to go for guardianship. How's that going to work, Dionne?
To go for, if I was going to go for guardianship?
Yeah, let's say that based on what she's, let's
Yeah.
move the scenario
Okay.
forward.
Okay. And
Peter
say that she
clearly
needs
is
a
not, he's
guardianship.
not helping her with her finances, right? He's
Yes.
a hindrance.
Yes.
And George decides to go for, don't worry, I'm not going to call on you. George decides to go for guardianship, and
Yes.
I'm George. I'm going to go for the guardianship, but
Okay.
So what do you need to make sure that the power of attorney doesn't interfere with the guardian?
Well, the first thing you want to do is you have to see what her capacity is, and you're going to try to see if you can revoke that power of attorney if there is that. Remember, Peter, as the power of attorney, has a fiduciary duty to act on Yelena's behalf. And if he's abusing that, that's number one, and that's why they changed the laws in New York, right? he has to say that he's aware that he's doing that. And then the other thing is, the first thing I would do is seek to revoke that power of attorney. So you get that to every place that is out there.
Cool. Okay, a couple more questions?
I have a statement regarding the promoting awareness portion of the title.
Okay.
The very first person that came to her door about the furnace, was it?
Yes.
JASA has this phenomenal series of trainings, and one of them is for gatekeepers.
Did they pay you?
But right away, I thought gatekeeper and elder abuse awareness and how important they are.
Cool.
That's
Thank
true.
you.
That's true.
And one last.
Okay, this is Bida Shamas from Other Protective Services, the Brooklyn Office North. A question. I have similar cases, and how can a caseworker or a social worker obtain the bank statements?
Okay.
Is it through the court or,
Well, that's a question, I think, for Dionne and for
Oh.
Rima.
Great. So I'll answer first. What you need to do is, APS sometimes can get those bank statements by simply going in. You can kind of ask for it, and you could, if the client is willing to give
I
you, of
asked the
course, to
bank-
go through. The other thing you could do is try to get a subpoena to get those bank statements, to find out exactly what's going on there, without a court, which is basically the court giving you permission to go and get the statements.
Rima, do you have
I
anything
work
to
with Adult Protective Services, so I have the same question, actually. Our relationships with the banks are improving. We get a lot of referrals from the banking industry. Sometimes they're willing to share information. It helps if the client is cooperative, but we do hit a wall when we're trying to get information or bank statements from a bank.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much. And thank you.